the UK government now cease arming Israel to ensure that the UK upholds the ICJ's ruling and its provisional measures?
Then shouldn't our government make sure that they're clear that severe consequences will follow, including further sanctions, until Israel respects this ceasefire resolution and respects international law?
When can we all expect an explanation as to why there have been British aid agencies bombed by Israel with weapons potentially provided in part by us?
Andy MacDonald.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Minister has said on innumerable occasions that the UK has a robust export licensing regime. And many of us on this side of the House are not satisfied with that response. So will he please, finally, tell us what the legal advice is as to whether this country is in compliance with our obligations under international humanitarian law to ensure that those arms are not used to commit offences in Gaza?
Well, Mr Speaker, he really shouldn't expect me to make a different point from this dispatch box. Having set out the position of the government, that is the position of the government, and that is what I will reiterate. And in respect of his question about the arms export licensing and the application of international humanitarian law, I set out the government's position very clearly in my response to the Shadow Foreign Secretary. And, Mr Speaker, I have nothing further to add to that at this time.
Julia.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. What is the government's response to Israel's shutting off North Gaza to UNRWA, the only aid organisation with the ability to deliver aid at scale? And when will this government reinstate funding to UNRWA to stop and alleviate the starvation of Gazans?
Well, Mr Speaker, we've made it very clear that we will look at the interim report from Catherine Colonna. We will look at the United Nations reports, and we hope that reforms will be made in such a way that we can reinstate funding. But I should emphasise to the Honourable Lady that no funding is due from Britain until the end of April. In respect of her point about the spread of UNRWA, UNRWA is the only organisation which has the assets in place, the warehouses, the vehicles, the logistical support. So it is essential that those logistical elements are available if aid is to be distributed effectively in Gaza.
Teresa Villiers.
I've had constituents get in touch with me who tell me they feel badly let down by the vote in the UN yesterday. I just don't understand how the Minister and the Foreign Secretary can say that in policy terms that nothing has changed when the UK has just voted for a resolution that doesn't condemn the Hamas atrocity of 7th October and delinks a ceasefire with the release of hostages. As my honourable friend from Hendon pointed out, doesn't this make it less likely that the hostages will be released?
Minister.
Well, Mr Speaker, I don't agree with my honourable friend, and the resolution sets out the urgent demand for the unconditional release of all hostages, and we welcome the ongoing diplomatic efforts by Egypt, Qatar and the United States to this end, and she will have seen the reports and the media in that respect. And as I say, we have set out very clearly in our explanation of vote the regret that we have that the resolution did not once again condemn the terrorist attack, but she has heard repeatedly from this dispatch box that we do indeed do that.
Afzal Khan.
Mr Speaker, over the last week we have seen Israel continue to commit atrocities across Gaza as Al-Shifa hospital was besieged for several days. Medical staff from inside the hospital reported gun battles, workers being beaten, patients dying on the floor, and even execution-style killings. This is yet another example of Israel's mercilessly targeting civilians. Will the Minister unequivocally condemn Israel for authorizing and carrying out such heinous attacks and make clear that hospitals and places of refuge must not be targeted?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, the House will not recognise all of the things that he has just said, but let me make it absolutely clear once again that Israel does have the right of self-defence, but she must abide by international humanitarian law.
Manera Wilson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Can I just set the record straight with members opposite that we on these Liberal Democrat benches have for months been calling for an immediate bilateral ceasefire, and we welcome the UN Security Council resolution yesterday, but the reality is that northern Gaza is on the brink of famine, children are dying of malnutrition, tens of thousands of children are being killed or maimed by Israeli forces' bombardment. So does the Minister believe that Netanyahu's government is actually complying with the ICJ ruling, that the provisional order which states that Israel must ensure with immediate effect that its forces do not commit any of the acts prohibited by the Genocide Convention? And if he doesn't think that the Israeli government is complying with that, what is he doing about it?
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me make clear that what the government's position is in respect of the second part of her question. We respect the role and independence of the ICJ, but we do not believe and have never believed that this case launched now will be helpful in bringing the two parties together. And she will note that the court has called for the immediate release of the hostages and the need to get more aid into Gaza, and we strongly agree with that. And she will also know that the ICJ's provisional measures order is binding on the parties to the dispute as a matter of international law. But she will see that through the work that we have been carrying out, we are trying to address all the points that she made in the first part of her question, and we are obviously grateful for the support from the Liberal Democrat benches in trying to achieve that.
David Jones.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. May I press my right honourable friend further on the answer he just gave to the honourable member for Sunderland Central? The humanitarian situation in Gaza is, of course, dire. In northern Gaza, it's estimated that some 70% of the population are suffering the most appalling food shortages, resorting to eating animal feed, bird seed, grass. Does he not recognise that respected international partners such as Australia, Canada, Sweden and Denmark have now restored full funding to UNRWA, which is the most important and most capable humanitarian organisation in Gaza? Does he not think that the United Kingdom should do so as quickly as possible? And in what circumstances and under what conditions will that be done?
Minister.
Well, I say to my right honourable friend that Britain at the moment does not have a requirement to provide extra money because we have fully funded through our commitment to UNRWA up until the next financial year, and effectively that means the end of April. And I reiterated the point that he made so eloquently in an earlier response about the requirement for UNRWA assets to be used. And as he knows, we will look very carefully at these two reports which I mentioned, including the interim one which should be available in New York today, in the hope that there will be measures taken which will allow all of us, not just Britain but everyone, to restore funding to UNRWA in due course.
Beth Winter.
News agencies in the past hour are reporting that the Israeli National Security Minister, Itamar Ben-Gvir, has told Israeli Army Radio, we must enter Rafah now. Mr. Speaker, surely this announcement to undertake a military assault on an area of 1.7 million displaced people is a breach of a binding UN Security Council resolution and international law. The Minister must urgently set out what action he will consider to prevent the Israeli armed forces taking such action, and more specifically, does the UK agree that should Israel proceed with this action and refuse to adhere to the demand for an immediate ceasefire, it will be in violation of a binding resolution and in breach of international law?
Minister.
Well, I'm sure the Honourable Lady, given the position she's just outlined, will welcome Resolution 2728 and the progress that reflects yesterday. She will know, she quotes a specific Israeli minister, but she will know there are many voices in Israel at this time. Israel is a pluralist democracy, the only one in the region, and we are hearing many different voices. And in respect of any attack on Rafah, she will have heard the words of the Prime Minister and the Foreign Secretary, and indeed myself at the dispatch box, on the ill-advised nature of military action in Rafah at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Deputy Foreign Secretary stated when he spoke earlier that he will expect a full explanation from Israel around the incidents that were highlighted by my right honourable friend from Tottenham, that he will expect that. It happened on the 18th of January, and both myself and the member for Rutland and Merton raised it with himself around 8 weeks ago. I have also been to the UN in the last few weeks and raised it with diplomats there. So when can we all expect an explanation as to why there have been British aid agencies bombed by Israel with weapons potentially provided in part by us? Can he tell me when this explanation is going to come?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I say I'm extremely grateful to her for supporting the position that I have set out and the British government has set out, that we require an explanation from the Israeli government for the actions which took place. And we continue to press, but she will understand that the timing of that is not a matter which rests with the British government, but the Israeli government will have heard her and indeed our voices raised upon this matter.
Imran Hussain.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. After 6 months of bloodshed, starvation and the deliberate blocking of essential aid to Gaza, the UN Security Council has finally demanded an immediate ceasefire for the rest of Ramadan. But let us be clear in this House, 15 days is nowhere near long enough to meet the humanitarian catastrophe that now exists across Gaza, and to see no meaningful end to the violence today on the 16th day of Ramadan, almost 2 months after the ICJ warned of the plausible risk of genocide, leaves this resolution, frankly, extremely ringing hollow. So will the Minister heed the calls of this House and demand a permanent, lasting ceasefire? And can he explain how he expects this ceasefire, as demanded by the Security Council, to be enforced if the UK government is selling arms to the Israeli military that are used to bomb Gaza and break this UN-mandated ceasefire?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I have addressed the issue earlier in the statement of the supply of arms. And in respect of the resolution yesterday, I put it to the honourable gentleman that he is not recognising the importance of the resolution that was passed. Firstly, because it implemented the key things that Britain has been asking for. And secondly, because it represents a unity which allows the issues which he and I care about so much to be advanced. So I put it to him, Mr. Speaker, that Resolution 2728 is of much greater importance than he was submitting.
Crystal.
Mr. Speaker, it's clear to many international partners that the UK government must now accept that Israel is potentially committing war crimes and genocide. Is therefore even a chance, Mr. Speaker, that Israel is breaking international law by potentially committing war crimes and genocide? Why then will the UK government not take all precautions to adhere to its obligations as a party to the Genocide Convention and the Arms Trade Treaty and immediately cease arms export controls to Israel?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, can I say to the honourable gentleman, for whom I have great respect and with whom I've worked in the past, that I think there is something uniquely repulsive about accusing Israel of genocide, given the events that took place on October the 7th, when more Jewish people perished in a pogrom than at any time since the Holocaust and the Second World War.
Absalom Begum.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The UN Security Council has now voted for an immediate ceasefire in Gaza for only the remainder of Ramadan. It's almost now 2 months since the ICJ's plausible genocide ruling, and yet the killing, the destruction and the weaponised starvation goes on. Can the Minister outline what conversations he and the Foreign Secretary are having with their counterparts in the United States to ensure that the UN resolution this week is implemented? And will the UK government now cease arming Israel to ensure that the UK upholds the ICJ's ruling and its provisional measures?
Minister.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I don't recognise her description precisely of the ICJ interim ruling, but I welcome her support for Resolution 2728 and the position of the British government, and in respect of the work that we are doing with our counterparts not only in America but all around the world, I can assure her that that will continue with the greatest vigour.
Richard Bergen.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Speaker. The passing of the UN Security Council resolution demanding an immediate ceasefire is incredibly welcome. The issue now facing our government is what will it do to ensure that it's enforced, because we saw overnight more Israeli bombing and we saw overnight more killing of Palestinian civilians in Gaza. It was right that sanctions were imposed on extremist settlers last month. If the Israeli government continues to ignore the ruling of the UN's highest body, then shouldn't our government make sure that they're clear that severe consequences will follow, including further sanctions, until Israel respects this ceasefire resolution and respects international law?
Minister.
Mr. Deputy Speaker, the honourable gentleman will forgive me if I dissent from the language he is using and instead seek, as the British government consistently has done, to try and ensure that there is a pause which allows for aid to get in and the hostages to get out, and for there to be a sustainable ceasefire. That is the right approach to be taken, and one that is very substantially honoured in 2728, which was passed yesterday.